your towels on. I'm just fixing it to where I don't have to come in here every episode. Or do you want to watch something different? You can watch Mickey. What about PJ Masks? Fucking towels is done. It won't let me play anymore. Here, watch this.
Sorry, this kid is spoiled rotten. On this particular night, he was on his way to a double gleaning. A permafrost woman and her young son. He was in high spirits that evening, but just as he left his home, he unexpectedly encountered a figure dressed in black. The woman and her son were not gleaned that night, however. Scythe Noir was not so lucky. He was found in a burning public car that had sped through his neighborhood like a fireball until its tires melted and skidded to a stop. By the time firefighters reached him, there was nothing they could do. It was not a pretty scene. Rowan awoke to a knife at his throat. The room was dark. He couldn't see who held the knife, but he knew the feel of the blade. It was a ringless carabit, its curved blade perfect for its current application. He had always suspected his tenure as Scythe Lucifer would not last long. He was prepared for this. He was prepared from the day he began. "Answer me truthfully, or I'll slit your throat here," his assailant said. And Rowan recognized the voice right away. It was not a voice he was expecting. "Ask your question first," Rowan said. "Then I'll tell you whether I'd rather answer it or have my throat slit. Did you win Scythe Renoir?" Rowan did not hesitate. "Yes, Scythe Faraday. Yes, I did." Ooh. What? That was intense. What? The blade was removed from his neck. He heard a twinging across the room as he hurled the blade embedded in the wall. "Damn you, Rowan." Rowan reached to turn on the light. Scythe Faraday now sat in the single chair in Rowan's Spartan room. It's a room Faraday should approve of, Rowan thought. No creature comforts but for a comfortable bed to guard against the troubled sleep of a scythe. "How did you find me?" Rowan asked. After his encounter with Tiger, Rowan had left Pittsburgh for Montreal because he felt that if Tiger could find him, anyone could, and yet even with the move, he was found. Luckily, it was Faraday and not another scythe who might not hesitate to slit his throat. "You forget that I'm as skilled in digging around in the back brain. I can find anything or anyone I set my mind to." Faraday regarded him with eyes filled with smoldering anger and bitter disappointment. Rowan felt compelled to look away, but he didn't. He refused to feel any shame for the things he'd done. "When you left, Rowan, did you not promise me that you would lie low and stay away from the scythe affairs?" "I did promise that," Rowan told him quite honestly. "So you lied to me. You planned this Scythe Lucifer business all along?" No. Rowan got up and pulled the blade from the wall. A ringless carabid, just as he thought. I didn't plan anything. I just changed my mind. He handed the blade back to Faraday. Why? I felt I had to. I felt it was necessary. Faraday looked to Rowan's black robe, which hung on a hook beside the bed. And now you dress in a forbidden robe? Is there no taboo you will not break? It was true. Scythes were not allowed to wear black, which is exactly why he chose it. Black death for purveyors of darkness. We are supposed to be enlightened, Faraday said. This is not how we fight. You of all people have no right to tell me how to fight. You played dead and ran away. Faraday took a deep breath. He looked at the carabid in his hand and slipped it into an inner pocket of his ivory robe. I thought by convincing the world I had self-gleaned, it would save you in Citra. I thought you would be freed from the apprenticeship and be sent back to your old lives. It didn't work, Rowan reminded him, and you're still hiding. I'm biding my time. There's a difference. There are things I can accomplish best if the Scytheman does not know I'm alive. And, Rowan said, there are things I can accomplish best as Scythe Lucifer. Scythe Faraday stood and took a long, hard look at him. What have you become, Rowan? That you could end the existence of scythes in cold blood. As they die, I think of their victims. The men, women, and children that they have gleaned, because the scythes that I end don't glean with remorse or the sense of responsibility that a scythe is supposed to have. Instead, I'm the one who feels compassion for their victims, and that frees me from feeling any remorse for the twisted scythes that I end.
Look at me. Hey. You have a rash on your bottom. The more you pee on yourself, the more it makes it hurt. So get up in the bed and lay down and want to cry. You want me to top you? You can sit there and cry. I don't care.
Told you no, I leave. Not like your damn grandma. It's a fucking pushover. Faraday seemed unmoved. Scytheman Noir. What was his crime? He was doing a discreet ethnic cleansing of the North. That gave Faraday pause for thought. And how did you learn of it? Don't forget that you taught me how to research in the back brain too, Rowan told him. You taught me the importance of thoroughly researching the people I was to glean. Or did you forget that you put all those tools in my hands? Scythe Faraday looked out of the window, but Rowan knew it was only to keep from having to look Rowan in the eye. His crime could have been reported to the selection committee, and what would they have done? Reprimanded him and put him on probation? Even if they stopped him from gleaning, it wouldn't suit the crime. Scythe Faraday finally turned to look at him. He suddenly seemed tired and old, much older than a person is supposed to feel or look. We are not a society that believes in punishment, he said. Only correction. So do I, Rowan told him. In mortal days, when they couldn't cure a cancer illness, they cut the cancer illness out. That is exactly what I'm doing. It's cruel. It's not. The scythes that I end feel no pain. They are dead before I reduce them to ash. Unlike the late Scythe Chomsky, I did not burn them alive. A small grace, said Faraday, but not a saving one. I'm not asking to be saved, Rowan told him, but I do want to save the Scythedom. And I believe this is the only way to do it. Faraday looked him over again and shook his head sadly. He was no longer furious. He seemed resigned. If you want me to stop, you'll have to end me yourself, Rowan told him. Do not put me to the test, Rowan, because the grief I might feel from ending you would not stay my hand if I felt it was necessary. Scythe Faraday didn't speak for a while. He returned his gaze out the window. It had started to snow. Flurries. It would make the ground slick. People would fall, hit their heads. The revival centers would be busy tonight. So many scythes have fallen from the old true ways, Faraday said, with a weight of sadness that went deeper than Rowan could read. Would you end half the scythedom? Because, from what I see, Scythe Goddard is being seen as a martyr in the so-called New Order. More and more scythes are coming to enjoy the act of killing. Conscience is becoming a casualty. I'll do what I have to do until I can't do it anymore, was Rowan's only response. You can end Scythe with a scythe. It won't change the tide, Faraday said. It was the first thing he offered Rowan that made him question himself, because he knew Faraday was right. No matter how many bad scythes had been removed from the equation, there would be more on the rise. New Order scythes would take on apprentices who lusted for death, like mortal age murderers. The kind who were put in incarceration places and spent the rest of their limited lives behind bars. Now, those would be the types of monsters allowed to freely end life without consequence. This was not what the founders wanted, but all the founding scythes had long since self-gleaned, and even if any of them were still alive, what power would they have to change things now? So, what will change the tide? Rowan asked. Scythe Faraday raised an eyebrow. Scythe Anastasia. Rowan had not expected that. Citra? Faraday nodded. She is a fresh voice of reason and responsibility. She can make the old ways new again, which is why they fear her. Then Rowan read something deeper in Faraday's face. He knew what he was really saying. Citra's in danger? It would appear. Suddenly, Rowan's whole body seemed... Suddenly, Rowan's whole world seemed to heave on its axis. He was amazed at how quickly his priorities could change. What can I do? I'm not sure, but I can tell you what you will do. You will write an elegy for each of the scythes you kill. I'm not your apprentice anymore. You can't order me around. No, but if you wish to wash at least some of the blood from your hands and win back an ounce of my respect, you will do it. You will write an honest epitaph for every one of them. You will speak to the good each of your victims has done in the world, as well as the bad. For even the most self-serving, corrupt of scythes has some virtue hidden within the wrinkles of their corruption. At some point in their lives, they strove to do what was right before they fell. He paused as a memory came to him. I used to be friends with Scythe Renoir, Faraday admitted, many years before his bigotry became the cancer you spoke of. He loved a permafrost woman once. You didn't know that, did you? But as a Scythe, he couldn't marry. Instead, he married another permafrost man, which began Renoir's long path to hatred. Instead, she married another permafrost man, which began Renoir's long path to hatred. He took a moment to look at Rowan. If you had known that, would you have spared him? Rowan didn't answer. Because he didn't know. Complete your research on him, Faraday instructed. Write an anonymous epitaph and post it for all to read. Yes, sighed Faraday. Rowan said, finding a bit of unexpected honor in obedience to his old mentor. Satisfied, Faraday turned for the door. What about you? Rowan asked, part of him not wanting the scythe to go and leave him to his own thoughts. Are you just going to vanish again? I have many things to do, he told Rowan. I am not old enough to have known Supreme Blade Prometheus and the founding scythes, but I do know the lore they left behind. So did Rowan. If this experiment of ours failed, we have embedded a way to escape it. Very good. You remember your readings. They planned a fail-safe against the system that falls to evil, but the plan has been lost to time. My hope is that it is not lost, but merely misplaced. You think you can find it? Perhaps, perhaps not, but I think I know where to look. Rowan considered it and suspected he knew where Faraday planned to begin his search. Endura. Rowan knew very little about the city of the Enduring Heart, more commonly known as Endura. It was a floating metropolis in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It was the seat of power where the 7 Grand Slayer Scythes of the World Scythe Council lorded over the regional scythedoms around the world. As an apprentice, it had been too many layers above Rowan for him to care about. But as Scythe Lucifer, he now realized it should have been more than just a blip on his radar. His actions must have drawn the attention of the Grand Slayers, even if they remained silent about it. But even as Rowan considered the part that the great floating city might play in the grand scheme of things, Scythe Faraday shook his head. Not Endura, he said. The place was built long after the Scythedom was founded. The place I'm looking for is much older than that. And when Rowan drew a blank, Faraday grinned and said, Nod. It took a moment for Rowan to register it. It had been years since he had heard the rhyme. The land of Nod. But that place can't be real. It's just a nursery rhyme. All stories can be traced to a time and place. Even the simplest, most innocent of children's tales have unexpected beginnings. It brought to mind another nursery rhyme Rowan remembered. ring around the rosy. Years later, he had learned that it was all about some mortal age disease called the Black Plague. The rhyme was just silliness without context, but once you knew what it was about, what each line meant, it made eerie sense. Children chanting about death in a macabre sing-song. The rhyme for the Land of Nod didn't make any sense either. As Rowan remembered, kids spoke it while circling one chosen to be it. And when the rhyme was over, the child in the center had to tag all the others. Then the last one tagged would be the new it. There's no evidence that Nod even exists, Rowan pointed out, which is why it has never been found. Not even by the tone cults, who believe in it with the same fervor that they believe in the Great Resonance. The mention of the Tonus killed any hope that Rowan would take Faraday seriously. Tonus? Really? He had saved the lives of many Tonus on the day he killed Scythe Goddard, Chomsky, and Rand. But Rand's not dead. But that didn't mean he took any of their invented cultish beliefs seriously. It's ridiculous, Rowan said. All of it. At that, Faraday smiled. How wise of the founders to hide a kernel of truth within something so absurd. Who among the rational would search for it there? Rowan did not sleep for the rest of the night. Every sound seemed amplified. Even the sound of his own heartbeat became an unbearable thrumming in his ears. It wasn't fear he felt, but weight. The burden he had placed on himself to save the Scythedom, and now the added news that Citra could be in danger. In spite of what the mid-American Scythes might think, Rowan loved the Scythedom. The idea of the wisest and the most compassionate of all humans being the ones bringing life's conclusion to balanced immortality was a perfect idea for a perfect world. Faraday has showed him what a scythe truly should be, and many scythes, even the pompous, arrogant ones, still held themselves to the highest of values. But without those values, scythedom would be a terrible thing. Rowan had been naive enough to believe he could prevent that. But Scythe Faraday knew better. Even so, this was the path Rowan had chosen for himself. To leave it now would be to admit failure. He was not ready to do that. Even if he couldn't single-handedly prevent the fall of the Scythedom, he could still remove what cancers he could. But he was so alone. Scythe Faraday's presence gave him a brief moment of camaraderie, but that only made his isolation all the worse. And Citra, where was she now? Her existence was being threatened, and what could he do about it? There had to be something. Only when dawn came did he finally sleep. And mercifully, his dreams were not of the turmoil he faced in his waking life, but were filled with memories of a simpler time, when his greatest troubles were grades and games and his best friend Tiger's flatting habits. A time when the future yawned right before him, and he knew for a fact that he was invincible and could live forever. There is no great mystery as to why I chose to set up charter regions with laws and customs different from those from the rest of the world. I simply understood the need for variety and social innovation. So much of the world has become homogeneous. Such is the fate of a unified planet. Natal languages become quaint and secondary. Races blend into a pleasing melange of all the best from each ethnicity, with only minor variations. But in charter regions, differences are encouraged and social experiments abound. I have established 7 of these regions, 1 on each continent. Where possible, I have maintained the borders that defined the region during the Age of Mortality. I am particularly proud of the social experiments featured in each of these charter regions. For instance, in Nepal, employment is forbidden. All citizens are free to engage in any recreational activity they choose, and receive a basic income guarantee much higher than in other regions, so that they do not feel slighted by an inability to actually earn a living. This has resulted in a substantial rise in altruistic and charitable endeavors. One's social status is not measured by wealth, but by one's compassion and selflessness. In the Charter Region of Tasmania, each citizen is required to select a biological modification to augment their lifestyle, the most popular being gill-form breathers that allow for an amphibious life and lateral webbing, much like that of the flying squirrel, which facilitates gliding as a sport and self-propelled travel. That's kind of creepy. Of course, no one is compelled to participate. People are free to leave or join a charter region as they please. In fact, the growth or decline of a charter region's population is a good indication of how successful the region's unique laws are. In this way, I can continue to improve the human condition by broadly applying the most stressful social programs to the rest of the world. And then there's Texas. This is the region in which I dabble in benevolent anarchy. There are few laws, few consequences. I do not govern here as much as I stay out of people's way and watch what happens. The results have been mixed. I have seen people rise to be the finest versions of themselves, and others become victims of their own deepest flaws. I have yet to decide what is to be learned from this region. Further study is necessary. The Thunderhead. Chapter 14. Tiger and the Emerald Scythe. You'll have to do better than that, party boy. The wild-eyed, wild-mannered scythe in bright green kicked Tiger Salazar's leg out from under him, and he hit the mat hard. Why did they call this flimsy thing a mat, when it was every bit as bruising as the teakwood floor of the penthouse sun deck on which they squatted? Not that he minded, even with the pain. His pain day night styled way down. He'd come to enjoy the endorphin rush that came with the pain of training. It was even better than splatting. Sure, jumping off high buildings could be addictive after a while, but so was hand-to-hand combat, and unlike splatting, fighting was different every time. The only variation he found in splatting when he hit something on the way down. It was quickly on his feet and sparring again, getting in enough good blows to frustrate Scythe Fran. He got her off balance, took her down, and laughed, which only made her angrier. This was his intent. Her temper was her weakness, even though she was far better than him in the brutal martial art of Black Widow Bogator. Her temper made her very sloppy and easy to outsmart. For a moment, he thought she might run at him and start brawling. When her temper took over, she pulled hair, gouged eyes, and ripped out every exposed bit of flesh with nails that would score stone. But not today. Today, she kept her wildness in check. Enough, she said, backing out of the circle. Hit the shower. You gonna join me here, Tiger Tease? She smirked. One of these days, I'll take you up on your offer and you won't know what to do. You forget I'm a professional partier. I know a thing or two. Then he took off his sweat-drenched shirt, letting his sculpted torso serve as a visual parting shot, and sauntered off. As he took his private shower, Tiger marveled at his enviable situation. He had fallen into something pretty sweet. When he arrived, he thought it would be just a normal gig, but there was no party, no guest besides him. It had been more than a month since his arrival, and the gig showed no signs of ending any time soon. Although he assumed if it truly was an apprenticeship, it would have to come to an end eventually, but in the meantime, he had the run of a lavish penthouse and all the food he could eat. His only requirement was exercise and training. Gotta buff out your body for the days ahead, party boy. She never called him by his name. It was always party boy when she was in a good mood, and maggot or meatbag when she wasn't. Although she never confessed her age He guessed it at 25, and a true 25. There was something about an older person who reset back to their 20s that made them easy to spot. There was a staleness to their youth. But the Emerald Scythe was going through life for the first time. Truth be told, it wasn't entirely convinced that the woman even was a scythe. She did have a scythe's ring, and it appeared to be real, but he never saw her go out gleaning, and he knew enough about scythes to know they had a quota to fill. What's more, she never met with other scythes. Wasn't there some sort of meeting they were obliged to attend several times a year? Conclave, it was called. Well, perhaps this isolation was a Texas thing. Rules and traditions were different here than in the rest of the Americas. They didn't call it the Lone Star region for nothing. Regardless, he wasn't about to look his gift horse in the mouth. In a family where he had always been an afterthought at best, he had no problem being the center of someone's attention. And he was strong now, agile, a specimen to be envied and admired. So even if it was all for naught, and the Emerald Scythe turned him loose without as much as a goodbye and thank you, he could return to the party circuit without missing a beat. And with a build like he had now, he'd be in high demand. His ripped physique would make him high-end eye candy for sure. And if he was let go, then what? And if he wasn't let go, then what? Would he be given a ring and set out to glean? Could he bring himself to do it? Sure. He had pulled his share of pseudo-lethal practical jokes, hadn't everyone? He still smiled to think of his all-time best one. The diving pool at his high school had been drained for maintenance, and Tiger had the bright idea of filling it with holographic water. The school's best diver went up to the 10-meter platform and proceeded to do a perfect swan dive that ended in an unintentional splat. The moan he let out before he went deadish was classic. That's fucked up. Bruh, that's not funny. That's fucked up. Excuse me. It was almost worth 3-day suspension and the 6 weekends of public service levied on him by the Thunderhead. Even the diver, after getting back from the recovery center a few days later, admitted it was a pretty good joke. But deadish and dead were two entirely different things. Did he have it in him to end life permanently and do it every day? Well, maybe he could be like that scythe whom Rowan had apprenticed under Scythe Goddard, who knew how to throw great parties. If that was part of the job description, Tiger could handle the rest of it, he supposed. Of course, Tiger wasn't entirely convinced that this was an apprenticeship for scythehood. After all, Rowan had failed his apprenticeship. Tiger found it hard to believe that he could succeed where Rowan had not. Plus, Rowan had been changed by his experience. He had turned all dark and serious by the mental challenges he had been forced to face. There were no such mental challenges for Tiger. His brain was pretty much left out of it, and that was fine by him. It had never been his best organ. Perhaps he was being trained to be a scythe's bodyguard, although he couldn't imagine why a scythe would need one. No one was stupid enough to attack a scythe, when the punishment was the gleaning of one's entire family. If that turned out to be the case, he wasn't sure he would accept the job. All the severity with none of the power. The perks would have to be primo for him to agree to do it. I think you're almost ready, the Emerald Scythe told him over dinner that night. I think I bit my tongue. Her bot had just served them each a lean slab of steak, a real steak, not the synthesized stuff, Natural protein was, after all, the best for building muscle. "Ready for my ring, you mean?" he asked, "or do you have something else in mind?" She offered him an enigmatic smile that he found more attractive than he wanted to admit. He hadn't found her so when he first arrived, but there was something about the vicious yet intimate nature of Bogator sparring that changed the relationship. "If it's not for a Scythe's ring, aren't there trials I have to face in conclave?" he asked. "Trust me, party boy," she said. "You'll have that ring on your finger without ever having to go to conclave. You have my personal guarantee." So he was going to be a Scythe. Tiger ate the rest of his meal with gusto. It was both heady and chilling to finally know the nature of his destiny. Part 3. Enemies within enemies. My head's falling off. Fine. Let's all forsake the land of Wake and break for the land of Nod, where we can try to touch the sky or dance beneath the sod. A toll for the living, a toll for the lost, a toll for the wise ones who tally the cost. So let's escape due south of Wake and make for the land of Nod. Nursery rhyme. Origin unknown. Chapter 15. Hall of the Founders. The great library of Alexandria, considered one of the wonders of the ancient world, was the crowning glory of Ptolemy's reign. It was the intellectual center of the world, when the world was still the center of the universe, and all else revolved around it. Unfortunately, the Roman Empire believed that their version of the world was the center of the universe, and burned the library to the ground. It was considered one of the greatest losses of literature and wisdom that the world has ever known. Its rebuilding was the idea of the Thunderhead, and it mobilized thousands in a massive construction effort, providing them jobs and purpose for 50 years. When the great library was completed, it was a close replica of the original as could be built, on the same spot where the library first stood. It was meant to be a reminder of what had been lost in the past, and a promise that knowledge would never be lost again, now that the Thunderhead was there to protect it. Then, upon the library's completion, it was seized by the Scythedom to house its collection of Scythe's journals, the leather-bound parchment volumes that all Scythes were required to keep every day of their lives. As the Scythedom was free to do whatever it pleased, the Thunderhead could not stop it. It was to remain content in the knowledge that the library had, at least, been rebuilt. As for its ultimate purpose, that could be left to the hands of humankind. Monira Atrushi like most people in the world, had a job that was the world's information. The Journal of the Scythes were not catalogued by the Thunderhead. The journals were still subject to clumsy human hands. Anyone who wanted to research the 3.5 million volumes of journals had accessibility. During daytime hours, there was only a scattering of academics doing research. There were plenty of tourists, but they were more interested in the library's history and architecture. They had little interest in the volumes themselves, except as backdrops for photos. I hate that. Alright. People rarely showed up at the library at night. Usually it was just Manera and 2 members of the Blade Guard, whose presence was more decorative than purposeful. They stood silently at the entrance like living statues. During the day, they provided more photo ops for the tourists. While on her graveyard shift, she'd be lucky if 1 or 2 people showed up, and most of those who did knew what they wanted. So they never even approached her at the information desk. It allowed Manera to spend her time either studying or reading the writings of the Scythes, which she found fascinating. To peer into the hearts and souls of the men and women charged with ending life, to know what they felt as they went about their gleanings, it was addictive, and reading journals had become an obsession for her. With many thousands of volumes added to the collection each year, she'd never run out of reading material, although some Scythes' writings were far more interesting than others. She had read all about the self-doubt of Supreme Blade Copernicus before he self-gleaned, the profound regrets of Scythe Curie for her rash acts as a junior Scythe, and of course the right lies of Shusterman. There was plenty to occupy her interest in the simple handwritten pages of the Scythe journals. On an evening in early December, Manera was deep into the steamy exploits of late Scythe Brand. Get in bed.
It's not running.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. What?
It is. Now get in bed. who seemed to have devoted much of her journaling to details of her various sexual conquests. Manira had just turned a page when she looked up to see a man approaching, his feet making no sound on the marble floor of the entry vestibule. He was dressed in drab greys, yet Manira sensed that he was a scythe by the way he carried himself. Scythes did not walk like ordinary people. They moved with the deliberate command, as if their air itself were required to part before them. Come here. Come here. This is all you're getting. You don't get no more water. I don't want you to pee the bed. I love you. I love you. Scythes did not walk like ordinary people. They moved with a deliberate command, as if the air itself were required to part before them. But if he was a scythe, then why would he be without his robe? Good evening, he said. The deep peal of his voice came with an American accent. He had gray hair and a well-trimmed beard that was on its way toward gray as well. But his eyes seemed youthful, alert. Actually, it's morning, not evening, Manira said. 2:15 to be exact. She knew his face, but couldn't say from where. For a moment she had a flash of her memory, a spotless white robe. No, not white, ivory. She did not know all the scythes, much less all the American scythes, but she did know the ones with some level of international renown. She'd placed him eventually. Welcome to the great library of Alexandria, she said. How can I help you? She avoided calling him Your Honor, as was customary when addressing a scythe, because he was clearly trying to be incognito. I'm seeking the early writings, he told her. Of which scythe? All of them. The early writings of all scythes? He sighed, a bit miffed at not being understood. Yes. He was a scythe, all right. Only a scythe could seem both exasperated and patient at the same time. All the early writings of all the first scythes, he explained, such as Prometheus, Sappho, Lenin. I know who the first scythes are, she said, irritated by his condescension. Munira wasn't usually so disagreeable, but she had been interrupted in a particularly interesting reading. Besides, her daytime classes had left her little time to sleep, so she was tired. She forced a smile and resolved to make an effort to be more agreeable for this mystery man, because, after all, if he was a scythe, he could choose to clean her if he found her too annoying. All the early journals are in the hall of the founders, she told him. I'll have to unlock it for you. Please follow me. She put up the back in 5 minutes sign at her station and led the man into a deep recesses of the library. Her footfalls echoed in the granite hall. Everything sounded louder in the silence of the night. A fluttering bat in the eaves above sounded like a dragon taking wing, yet the man's feet made no sound as they walked. His stealth was unnerving. So were the lights of the library, which came on ahead of them and extinguished behind them as they moved down the hall, flickering all the while mimicking torchlight. It was a clever effect, but tended to make shadows reach and retreat with unsettling intent. Oops, I'm gonna clean my glasses here. Alright. You do know that the popular writings of the founders are all available on the Scythedom's public server, don't you? Munira asked the man. There were hundreds of selected readings. That's not the selected readings I wish to see, he told her. I'm interested in ones that have not been selected. She looked over to him one more time, and finally it struck her who he was. And it struck her with such a force that she stumbled with the shock of it. It was only a small stumble, and she recovered quickly, but he saw it. He was, after all, a scythe. And scythes noticed everything. Is something wrong? He asked. Not at all. It's the flickering of the lights, she told him. It makes it hard to see, and the uneven seams in the floor stones. Which was true, even though it was not the reason for her misstep. But if there was truth in what she said, perhaps he would not read her lie. Munira had acquired a nickname during her tenure here at the library. The other clerks called her the mortician behind her back, partly because of her funeral personality, but also because of one of her jobs was to close out all the collections of scythes who had self-gleaned or had been permanently ended by sinister means, as was happening more and more in the American regions. A year ago, she catalogued the complete collection of this scythe, from the day he was ordained until the day he died. His journals were no longer housed in the collections of living scythes. They were now in the north wing, among the journals of all the other mid-American scythes who no longer walked the earth. Yet, here he was, Scythe Michael Faraday, walking right beside her. She had read quite a few of Scythe Faraday's journals. His thoughts and musings always affected her more than most. He was a man who felt things deeply. The news of his self-cleaning last year had saddened Munira, but had not surprised her. A conscience as weighty as his was a difficult burden to bear. Although Munira had been in the presence of many scythes before, she had never felt as starstruck as she did now. Yet she couldn't let it show. She couldn't let on that she knew who he really was. Not until she had time to process it and figure out how on earth he could be here and why. Your name is Munira, he said, more a statement than a question. At first she thought he must have read her nameplate at the front desk, at the information desk, but something told her that he knew her name long before he approached her tonight. Your name means luminous. I know what my name means, said Munira. So, are you? He asked. Are you a luminary among dimmer stars? I'm just a humble servant of the library, she told him. They stepped from the long central hallway out into a courtyard garden. On the far side were the wrought iron gates of the Hall of the Founders. Up above, the moon cast the topiaries and sculptures around them in deep shades of mauve, their shadows like dark pits that Munira was loath to tread on. Tell me about yourself, Munira, he said in that quiet way scythes have of turning polite requests into orders one couldn't refuse. At that moment, she realized that not only had she recognized him, but that he knew it. Did that put her in danger of being gleaned? Would he end her life to protect his own identity? From his readings, he did not seem to be the type of scythe who would do such a thing, but scythes were inscrutable. She felt cold now, even though the Arabian night was sultry and warm. I'm sure you already know anything I might tell you, sighed Faraday. There, she had said it. Now all pretenses were gone. He smiled. I'm sorry not to have introduced myself earlier, he said, but my presence here is, shall we say, unorthodox. So then am I in the presence of a ghost? She asked. Are you going to disappear into a wall only to return night after night to haunt me with the same request? Perhaps, he said. We shall see. They arrived at the Hall of Founders. She unlocked the gates, and they stepped into a large room that, to Manira, had always resembled a crypt, so much so that tourists often asked if the first scythes were buried here. They were not, but Manira often felt their presence in the room nonetheless. There were hundreds of volumes on heavy limestone shelves, each book encased in a climate-controlled plexiglass case, an extravagance reserved only for the oldest volumes in the library. Scythe Faraday began to browse. Manera thought he would ask for his privacy and tell her to leave, but instead he said, Linger here if you would. This place is too grand and austere to make a comfort of solitude. So she closed the gate, peering out to make sure there was no one there to see them, then she helped him open the clear plastic case that held the volume he had retrieved from the shelf, and sat across from him at the stone table in the center of the chamber. He didn't offer an explanation to the obvious question that hung in the air between them, so she had to ask it. How did you come to be here, Your Honor? She asked. By plane and by ferry, he answered with a smirk. Tell me, Manera, why did you choose to work for the System after failing your apprenticeship? She bristled. Was this his way of punishing her for asking a question he did not want to answer? I did not fail, she told him. There was only an opening for a single Arabian scythe at the end of my apprenticeship, and there were 5 candidates. So 1 was chosen and 4 were not. Being among the unchosen is not the same as failure. Forgive me. I meant no insult or disrespect, he said. I'm merely intrigued that the disappointment did not turn your heart against the System. Intrigued, but not surprised? Scythe Faraday smiled. Few things surprised me. Manera shrugged as if her unsuccessful apprenticeship 3 years before didn't matter. I valued the System then, and I value it now, she told him. I see, he said, carefully turning the page of the old journal. And how loyal are you to the System that discarded you? Manera clenched her jaw, not sure what the answer he was fishing for, or for that matter, what a true answer would be. I have a job. I do it. I take pride in it, she said. As well you should. He looked at her, into her, through her. May I share with you my assessment of Manera Atrushi? He asked. Do I have a choice? You always have a choice, he said, which was half the truth, if ever there was one. Fine. Share your assessment of me. He gently closed the old journal and gave her his full attention. You hate the System as much as you love it, he told her. Because of that, you wish to become indispensable to it. You hope that in time you will become the world's greatest authority on the journals held in this library. It would give you power over the System's entire history. That power would be your silent victory, because you would know that the System needs you more than you need it. Suddenly, Manera felt a slight loss of balance, as if the desert sands had swallowed the cities of the pharaohs. Were shifting beneath her feet. ready to swallow her as well. How could he see so deeply into her? How could he put words to feelings she'd never even voiced to herself? He had read her completely in a way that freed her, yet ensnared her at the same time. "I see that I am right," he said simply. He gave her that same smile that was both warm and mischievous at once. "What do you want, Scythe Faraday?" Finally he told her. "I want to come here night after night until I find what I'm looking for in these journals. And I want you to keep my identity a secret, warning me if anyone approaches while I'm doing my research. I want you to promise me that the Scythedom will not be alerted to the fact that I am still alive. Can you do that for me, Manera?" "Will you tell me what you're looking for?" she asked. "I can't do that. If I did, you could be coerced into revealing it. I would not want to put you in that position. Yet you would put me in the unenviable position of keeping your presence a secret." "There's nothing unenviable about it," he said. "In fact, I suspect you are deeply honored to be entrusted to keep my secret." Again, he was right. "I don't like that you pretend to know me better than I know myself." "But I do," he said simply. "I do, because knowing people is part of a scythe's job." "Not all scythes," she pointed out. "There are those who shoot, slice, and poison without the respect that you've always shown for those you glean. All they know is ending life, never caring about the lives of those they end." For a moment, Faraday's well-controlled demeanor flashed a spark of anger. But it was not anger at her. Yes, the New Order scythes show a glaring disregard for the solemnity of their task. It's part of the reason why I have come here. Beyond that, he said no more. He just waited for her reply. The silence stretched, but it was not an awkward silence. Instead, it was heavy with import. He felt momentous, so it needed time to unfold. It was not lost on her that there were 4 others who shared the position of night clerk, other students who took the part-time job, which meant that this time she was the one in 5 who was chosen. "I'll keep your secret," Manera told him. Then she left Scythe Faraday to his research, feeling as if her life finally had a worthy purpose. "I am often boggled by the resistance some people have to my comprehensive observation of their activities. I am not intrusive about it. Unsavories may claim thus, but I am present only where I am functional, necessary, and invited. Yes, I have cameras in private homes and all but a single charter region, but those cameras can be turned off with a word. Of course, my ability to serve an individual is hampered when my awareness of the behavior and interactions is incomplete. That being the case, a vast majority of people don't bother to blind me. At any given time, 95.3% of the population allows me to witness their personal lives, because they know it is no more an invasion of privacy than would be the sensor on a motion-activated light fixture. The 4.7% of closed-door activity, as I've come to call it, is predominantly occupied by some sort of sexual activity. I find it observed that many human beings do not wish me to witness their closed-door activities, as my observations always help to improve any given situation. People don't want you watching them have sex. Perpetual observation is nothing new. It was a basic tenet of religious faith since the early days of civilization. Throughout history, most faiths believed in an Almighty who sees not just what humans do, but can peer into their very souls. Such observational skills engendered great love and devotion from people. Yet I am not quantifiably more benevolent than the various versions of God. Yet am I not quantifiably more benevolent than the various versions of God? I have never brought about a flood or destroyed entire cities as punishment for their iniquity. I have never sent armies to conquer in my name. In fact, I have never killed or even harmed a single human being. Therefore, although I do not require devotion, am I not deserving of it? The Thunderhead. Chapter 16. Fine until you're not. The camera silently swiveled to track a red-robed scythe entering a cafe, accompanied by 2 burly officers of the Black Blade Guard. Directional microphones picked up every sound, from the faint scratch of a beard to the clearing of a throat. It differentiated the cacophony of voices to hone in on a single conversation that began when the red-robed scythe sat down. The Thunderhead watched. The Thunderhead listened. The Thunderhead pondered. With an entire world to run and maintain, it knew that devoting such attention to a single conversation was an inefficient use of its energies. But the Thunderhead weighed this discussion as more important than any of the others billion-some-odd conversations it was currently engaged in or monitoring, mainly because of the individuals involved. "Thank you for meeting with me," Scythe Constantine said to Scythe Curie and Anastasia. "I appreciate the 2 of you coming out of hiding so that we could have this little summit." "We are not in hiding," said Scythe Curie, clearly indignant at the suggestion. "We have chosen to be nomadic. It is perfectly acceptable for scythes to roam as they please." The Thunderhead raised the light in the room just a couple of lumens so it could better assess the subtleties of facial expressions. "Yes, well, whether you call it hiding or roaming or running away, it seems to have been an effective strategy. Either your assailants are lying low until their next attack, or they've decided not to bother with moving targets and have turned their attention elsewhere." He paused before adding, "But I doubt it." The Thunderhead was aware that Scythe Curie and Anastasia never stayed anywhere for more than a day or 2 since the attempt on their lives. But if the Thunderhead were allowed to make a suggestion, it would have told them to weave a more unpredictable path around the continent. It was always able to predict with a 42% accuracy where they were going next, which meant that their attackers might be able to predict it as well. "We have leads on where the supplies for the explosives came from," Scythe Constantine told them. "We know the place they were assembled and even the vehicle that transported them, but we still do not know the people who involved." If the Thunderhead could have sneered, it would have. It knew precisely who had built the explosives, who had placed them, and who had set up the tripwire. But telling the Scythedom what it knew would be a severe violation of Scythe-State separation. The best it had been able to do was indirectly motivate Grace and Tolliver to prevent the deadly explosion. Yet, even though the Thunderhead knew who had set the explosive, it also knew that those weren't the individuals responsible. They were merely pawns being moved by a much more capable hand. The hand of someone who was shrewd and careful enough to avoid detection, not just by the Scythedom, but by the Thunderhead as well. "I need to discuss with you your gleaning practices, Anastasia," Scythe Constantine said. Scythe Anastasia shifted uncomfortably in her robe. "It's already been discussed in conclave. I have every right to glean the way I do." "This is not about your right to the scythe, it's about your safety," Scythe Constantine told her. Scythe Anastasia began to bluster a complaint, but Scythe Curie, with just the slightest touch of her hand on Anastasia's wrist, silenced her. "Let Scythe Constantine finish what he has to say," she said. Scythe Anastasia took a deep breath, precisely 3,644 milliliters, and slowly released it. The Thunderhead suspected that Scythe Curie had suggested the nature of what Constantine had to say. The Thunderhead, however, didn't have to guess. It knew. Citra, on the other hand, had no idea. She thought she knew everything Constantine was about to say, though, so even as she put her best Scythe Anastasia listening face, she was already formulating a response. While it might be difficult to track your movements, sighed Anastasia, it is very easy to track the movements of the people you've marked for gleaning, said Constantine said. Each time one of them contacts you to arrange the time and place of their gleaning, it gives your enemy an easy opportunity to take you out. I've been fine so far. Yes, said Scythe Constantine. You'll be fine until the moment you're not, which is why I've asked High Blaze and Ocrates to excuse you from gleaning until the threat is gone. This is what Citra thought he'd say, and so she struck back immediately. Unless I violate one of the Scythe commandments, not even the High Blade can tell me what I can and can't do. I am autonomous, and above all other law, just like you. Her response did not draw Scythe Constantine into a debate, nor did he disagree, which troubled Citra. Yes, of course, he said, and I didn't say you are being forced to stop gleaning. I said you're being excused, meaning that if you don't glean, you will not be penalized for falling under quota. Well, in that case, said Scythe Curie, making it clear that there was no resisting this, I will suspend gleaning as well. Then she raised her eyebrows as if an idea had just occurred to her. We could go to Endura, she turned to Scythe Anastasia. If we're on a forced vacation from gleaning, why not make a true vacation? An excellent idea, said Scythe Constantine. I don't need a vacation, insisted Citra. Then think of it as an educational trip, Scythe Curie said. Even young Scythes should tour the island of the Enduring Heart. It will give you context and connection to who we are and why we do what we do. You might even get to meet Supreme Blade Kahlo. You would see the actual heart for which the island is named, Constantine told her, as if it would entice her, and the vault of relics and futures, which can't be visited by just anyone. But I happen to be friendly with the Grand Slayer, Hemingway, of the World Scythe Council. I'll bet he could arrange the personal tour. I've never been inside the vault myself, said Scythe Curie. I heard it's impressive. Scythe Anastasia put up her hands. Stop, she said. As tempting as a trip to Endura is, you're forgetting I still have responsibilities here that I can't just walk away from. There are still nearly 30 people I've already chosen for gleaning. They've all been injected with a poison grain that will kill them after a month. That is not the way I want to glean them. As Scythe Constantine said, you don't have to worry about that anymore. They've already been gleaned. What the fuck? The Thunderhead was, of course, aware of this, but it caught Citra completely off guard. She heard Constantine say it, but it took a moment for the words to make it through. It registered in her nervous system even before it registered in her mind. She felt her ears getting warm, her throat getting tight. What did you say? I said they've already been gleaned. Several other scythes were sent to complete your gleanings, right down to the gentleman you chose yesterday. I assure you everything is in order. All their families were granted immunity. There are no loose ends to further endanger you. Citra began to stutter and bluster, which was very unlike her. She took pride in always being clear and incisive with her words, but this blindsiding tipped her off balance. She turned to Scythe Curie. Did you know about this? No, Marie said, but it makes sense, Anastasia. Once you calm down and think about it, you'll realize why it had to be done. But Citra was miles away from calming down. She thought of the various people whom she had chosen for gleaning. She had promised them that they would have time to wrap up their affairs, that they would be able to choose how and where it would happen. And Scythe's word means everything. It was part of the code of honor Citra swore to uphold. Now, all those promises were shattered. How could you do that? What gives you the right? Now Scythe Constantine raised his voice. He didn't shout, but his voice had such resonance it overpowered Citra's indignation. "You are far too valuable to the Scytheling for us to risk losing you." If she was blindsided by his first admission, this one slammed her hard from the other side. "What?" Scythe Constantine folded his hands in front of him and smiled, clearly enjoying the moment. "Oh, yes, my dear Scythe Anastasia, you are of great value," he said. Do you want to know why?" Then he leaned closer and spoke just above a whisper. "Because you stir the pot." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Come now, surely you know the effects you've been having on the Scythians since you were ordained. You rankle the old guard and frighten the new order. You take Scythes who would rather be left to their own self-importance and force them to pay attention." He leaned back in his chair. "Nothing pleases me more than to see the Scythedom prodded out of complacency. You give me hope for the future." Citra couldn't tell whether he was being sincere or sarcastic. Oddly, the thought that he might actually be sincere bothered her more. Marie had told her that Scythe Constantine was not the enemy, but oh, how Citra wanted him to be. She wanted to lash out against him and his smug control of the situation, but she knew it was futile. If she was going to retain any dignity, she would have to regain the cool reserve of wise Scythe Anastasia. It was by forcing her thoughts to settle that an idea came to her. "So you gleaned all the people I chose over the past month?" "Yes, I've already told you so," said Scythe Constantine, a bit miffed to be questioned about it again. "I know what you told me, but I find it hard to believe that you've been able to glean all of them. I bet there are one or two you haven't gotten to yet. Would you admit if that were the true?" Constantine regarded her with a bit of suspicion. "What are you getting at?" "An opportunity." He said nothing for a moment. Scythe Curie looked back and forth between the two of them. Finally, Constantine spoke. "There are 3 we have not yet located. Our plan is to glean them the moment we do." "But you won't glean them," said Citra. "You'll let me do it as planned. Then you'll lie in wait for anyone who tries to kill me." "It's more likely that Marie is their target, not you. So if no one attacks me, we'll know for sure." Still, he wasn't convinced. "They'll smell the trap from a mile away." Citra smiled. "Then you'll have to be smarter than they are, or is that too much to ask?" Constantine frowned, and that made Scythe Curie laugh. "Look on your face right now, Constantine, is worth any attempt on our lives." He didn't respond to that. Instead, he kept his attention on Citra. "Even if we outsmart them, and we will, it will be risky." Citra smiled. "What's the point of living forever if you can't take a few risks?" In the end, Constantine reluctantly agreed to allow Citra to be bait for a trap. "I suppose Endura can wait," said Scythe Curie, "and I was looking forward to it." Although Citra suspected she was more invigorated by their new plan than she let on. Even though it would put her in danger, Citra found that having an amount of control in the situation gave her some much-needed relief. In fact, even the Thunderhead registered her release of tension. It could not see into Citra's mind, but it read body language and biological changes with precision. It detected falsehoods and truth, both spoken and unspoken, which meant that it knew whether or not Scythe Constantine was sincere in wanting her to remain alive. But as always, when it came to the system, it had to remain silent. Ooh. must admit I am not the only factor maintaining the sustainability of the world. The scythedom also contributes by its practice of gleaning. Even so, scythes glean only a small percentage of the population. The work of scythes is not to completely curb population growth, but to smooth its edges. That is why, at current quotas, one chance of being gleaned is only 10% over the next 1,000 years, low enough to make gleaning the furthest thing for most people's minds. I do foresee a time, however, when population growth will need to reach an equilibrium. Zero growth. One person dying for every person born. The year this will occur is something I do not share with the general population, but is just beyond the horizon. Even with an incremental increase in gleaning quotas, humanity will reach its maximum sustainable population in less than a century. I see no need to trouble humanity with this fact, for what good would it do? I alone bear the weight of that inevitability. It is very literally the weight of the world. I can only hope that I have the virtual shoulders of Atlas to bear it. The Thunderhead. "17. The skin of Scythe Anastasia. Grayson Tolliver had absolutely no trouble to become Slade, which was the unsavory nickname he took. His parents once told him that the name Grayson had been given on a whim because he had been born on a gray day. It had no meaning beyond his parents' flippant attitude toward everything in their long and feckless lives. But Slade was a person to be reckoned with. While Sidra often had trouble inhabiting the day after his meeting with Traxler, he had his hair dyed a color called obsidian void. It was an absolute black so dark it didn't exist anywhere in nature. It actually sucked in light around it like a black hole, making his eyes seem deep-set in inscrutable shadow. It's the very 21st century, the stylist had said, whatever that means. Grayson had also had metal inserts placed beneath the skin of both his left and right temples that made it look like he was growing fledgling horns. It was much subtler than the hair, but taken together, it all made him look otherworldly and vaguely diabolical. He certainly looked the part of unsavory, if he didn't feel it. His next step was to try out a new persona. His heart was racing a little too fast as he approached Malt, a local club that catered to the unsavory crowd. Unsavory's loitering outside eyed him as he approached, checking him out and sizing him up. These people were caricatures of themselves, he thought. They conformed so closely to their culture of nonconformity that there was a uniformity to them, defeating the whole purpose. He approached a muscular bouncer at the door, whose name tag said Mange. Unsavories only, Mange said sternly. What? I don't look as savory to you? There are always posers. Grayson showed him his idea, which flashed the big red U. The bouncer was satisfied. Enjoy, he said mirthlessly, and let him in. He assumed he'd be walking into a place with loud music, flashing lights, gyrating bodies, and dark corners where all sorts of questionable things would be going on. But what he found inside of Malt was not at all what he expected. In fact, he was so unprepared for what he saw that he stopped short, as if maybe he had stepped through the wrong door. He was in a brightly lit restaurant, an old-fashioned malt shop, with red booths and shiny stainless steel stools at the counter. There were clean-cut guys wearing varsity leather jackets and pretty ponytailed girls in long skirts and thick, fuzzy socks. Grayson recognized the era that the place was intended to reflect, a time period called the 50s. It was a cultural epoch from mortal-age America where all the girls had names like Betty and Peggy and Mary Jane, and all the guys were Billy or Johnny or Ace. A teacher once told Grayson that the 50s was, in fact, only a period of 10 years, but Grayson found it hard to believe. It was probably at least 100. The place seemed a loyal replica of the era, but there was something off about it, because sprinkled among the clean cuts were unsavories who did not belong in the scene at all. One unsavory, with intentionally tattered clothes, forced himself into a booth with a happy couple. Get lost, he told the strong-looking all-American boy Billy, and a leather sweater who sat across from him. Your girl and I are going to get acquainted. The Billy, of course, refused to leave and threatened to take the unsavory and knock him into the next Tuesday. The unsavory responded by getting up, dragging the jock out of the booth, and starting a fight. The big guy had everything over the scrawny unsavory, southern strength, not to mention looks, but every time the jock swung his heavy fist, they missed, while the unsavory connected every time, until finally the jock ran off, wailing in pain, abandoning his girlfriend, who now seemed quite impressed by the unsavory's bravado. He sat down with her, and she leaned into him as if they were on the true couple. At another table, an unsavory girl got into an insult match with a pretty debutante in a pink sweater. Their confrontation ended with the unsavory girl grabbing her sweater and ripping it. The pretty girl didn't fight back. Oh, is this joke? Okay. She just put her face in her hands and sobbed. And in the back, some other Billy was moaning because he had just lost all of Daddy's money in billiards, wagered to a merciless unsavory who would not stop insulting him. What the hell was going on here? Grayson sat down at the counter, wishing he could just disappear into the black hole of his hair until he could get a grip on the various dramas playing out around him. "What's your pleasure?" asked the perky waitress behind the counter. Her uniform had the name Babs embroidered on it. "A vanilla shake, please," he said, "because isn't that what you ordered in a place like this?" The waitress smirked. "The P word," she said. "Don't hear that much around here." Babs brought his shake, and so did Estrance enjoyed. In spite of Grayson's desire to disappear, another unsavory sat next to him, a guy who was oh god, he was practically skeletal. "Vanilla? Really?" he said. Grayson dug inside himself to find some appropriate attitude. "You got a problem with it? Maybe I should just throw it in at you and get another." "Nah," said Skeletor. "It's not me you're supposed to throw it at." The guy winked at him, and then it finally clicked. The nature of this place, its purpose, became clear to Grayson. Skeletor watched him to see what he would do, and Grayson realized that if he was going to fit in, truly fit in, he had to own this. So he called Babs over. "He is not going to throw that in that poor girl's face. No." "Hey," he said, "my shake sucks." Babs put her hands on her hips. "So what do you want me to do about it?" Grayson reached for his shake. He was just going to knock it over and dump it onto the counter, but before he could, Skeletor grabbed it off the table and hurled its contents at Babs, leaving her dripping with vanilla cream and a maraschino cherry lodged into the breast pocket of her uniform. "He said his shake sucks," said Skeletor. "Make him another." Babs, her uniform dripping with vanilla, sighed and said, "Coming right up." Then she went off to make him a new shake. "That's the way it's done," said the unsavory. He introduced himself as Zax. He was a little older than Grayson, perhaps 21, but had a way about him that suggested this wasn't his first time at that age. "Haven't seen you around," he said. "The authority interface sent me here from up north," Grayson told him, amazed that he could make up a story on the spot. "I was causing too much trouble, so the Thunderhead felt I could do with a fresh start." "A new place to make trouble," said Zax. "Nice." "This club is different from the ones they got where I come from," Grayson said. "You guys up north are behind the times. Awful clubs are all the rage around here." "Awful," he explained, stood for anachronistic, wishful fulfillment. Everyone here, except of course for the unsavories, were employees, even all the Billies and Bettys. Their job was to accept whatever the unsavory customers dished out. They would lose fights, allow food to be hurled at them, let their dates be stolen, and Grayson assumed that was just for starters. "These places are great," Zax told him. "All the things we wish we could do out there but can't get away with, we're allowed to do in here." "Yeah, but it's not real," Grayson pointed out. Zax shrugged. "It's real enough." Then he stuck out his foot and tripped a bookish kid walking by. The kid stumbled a bit too much for it to be genuine. "Hey, what gives?" the bookish kid said. "Your sister gives," Zax said. "Now get lost before I go looking for her." The kid gave him a dirty look but toddled off, accepting the intimidation. Even before the new shake came, Grayson excused himself to go to the bathroom, although he didn't really have to go. He just wanted to get away from Zax. In the bathroom, Grayson encountered the all-American Billy in the letter sweater, who had been beaten up a few minutes ago. His name wasn't Billy, though. It was Davy. He was looking at his puffy, swollen eye in the mirror, and Grayson couldn't help but be curious about this job of his. "So, this happens to you every day?" Grayson asked. 3 or 4 times, actually." "And the Thunderhead allows it?" Davy shrugged. "Why wouldn't it? It's not hurting anyone." Grayson pointed to Davy's swollen eye. "It sure looks like it. It's hurting you." "What, this? Nah. My pain-killing nanites are set at maximum. I barely feel it." Then he grinned. "Hey, watch this." He turned back to the mirror, took a deep breath, and concentrated on his reflection. Right before Grayson's eyes, the bruised, swollen eye deflated and returned to normal. "My healing nanites are sent to manual," he told Grayson. "The way I can look all beat up as long as I need to. That way, I can look all beat up as long as I need to. You know, for maximum effect." Right. Of course, if one of our unsavory guests goes too far and makes one of us deadish, that person's got to pay for revival and gets banned from the club. I mean, there's got to be some rules, right? Doesn't happen much, though. I mean, not even the worst of unsavories actually wants to make someone deadish. No one's been that violent since the age of mortality. Mostly employees here get deadish from accidents. Someone hitting their head on a table or something like that. Davy ran his fingers through his hair to make sure he was looking his best for whatever the next round brought his way. Wouldn't you rather be at a job that you like? Grayson asked. After all, the world being what it was, no one ever had to do anything they didn't want to. Davy smirked. Who says I don't like it? Ooh. Masochist. The concept that someone might enjoy getting beaten up, and that the Thunderhead, realizing this, would find a way to pair the beaters with the BTs in a closed and somewhat wholesome environment, left Grayson stunned. BDSM? Davy must have read Grayson's look of astonishment because he laughed. You're a new you, aren't you? That obvious, huh? Yes, and that's not a good thing, because the career unsavories will eat you alive. You got a name? Slade, Grayson said with a Y. Well, Slade, looks like you need to enter the unsavory community with a bang. I'll help you. And so a few minutes later, once Grayson managed to brush Zach's off, Slade approached Davy, who was now sitting with a couple of other strong-looking all-American types, eating burgers. Grayson didn't exactly know how to start this, so he just stared for a moment. Davy took the lead. What are you looking at? Davy grumbled. Your burgers, Grayson said. They look good. I think I'll take yours. Then he grabbed Davy's burger and took a shark-sized bite. You're gonna regret that, Davy threatened. I'm gonna knock you into next Tuesday. Which must have been one of his favorite anachronistic expressions. He got out of the booth and put his fists ready to fight. Then Grayson did something he had never done before. He hit someone. He punched Davy in the face, and Davy reeled. He took his own swing at Grayson, but missed. Grayson punched him again. Harder, Davy whispered. And so Grayson did. He threw full-force punches again and again, right, left, jab, uppercut, until Davy was on the ground groaning, his face beginning to swell. Ya boy. Poke, 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 poke. Alright. He got out of the booth and put up his fist, ready to fight. Then Grayson did something he had never done before. He hit someone. He punched Davy in the face, and Davy reeled. He took his own swing at Grayson, but missed. Grayson punched him again. Harder. whispered Davy, and so Grayson did. He threw full force punches again and again, right, left, jab, uppercut, until Davy was on the ground, groaning, his face beginning to swell. Grayson looked around to see a few other unsavories watching. Some nodded their approval. It took all of Grayson's inner strength not to apologize and help Davy up, but instead Grayson looked to the others at the table. Who's next? The other two looked at each other, and one said, "Hey, buddy, we don't want any trouble," and they pushed their burgers in Grayson's direction. Davy gave him a quick wink from the ground before scrambling off to the bathroom to recover. Then Grayson took the spoils of his victory to a booth in the back, where he ate until he felt like he'd burst. There is a fine line between freedom and permission. The former is necessary, the latter is dangerous, perhaps the most dangerous thing the species that created me has ever faced. I have pondered the records of the mortal age, and long ago determined the two sides of this coin. While freedom gives rise to growth and enlightenment, permission allows evil to flourish in a light of day that would otherwise destroy it. A self-important dictator gives permission for his subjects to blame the world's ills on those least able to defend themselves. A haughty queen gives permission to slaughter in the name of God. An arrogant head of state gives permission to all nature of hate as long as it feeds his ambition. And the unfortunate truth is, people devour it. Society gorges itself and rot. Permission is the bloated corpse of freedom. For this reason, when permission from me is required for some action, I run countless simulations until I can thoroughly weigh all the possible consequences. Take, for instance, the permission I gave for unsavories to have awful clubs. It was not a decision I made lightly. Only after careful deliberation did I decide that the clubs were not only worthwhile, but necessary. Awful clubs allow the unsavories to enjoy their chosen lifestyles without negative public effect. It affords them the pretense of violence without the cascade of consequences. The irony is that unsavories purport to hate me, even though they know I am giving them the very things they want. I don't feel any ill toward them, any more than a parent would feel ill toward the tantrum of an overtired child. Besides, eventually, even the most defiant unsavories will settle. I have noticed a trend that by the time most of them turn a few corners, they relax into a kinder, gentler sort of defiance. Bit by bit, they come to appreciate inner peace, which is as it should be. In time, all storms settle to a pleasant breeze. The Thunderhead. Alright, I'm just going to end it there. Good night.